I think there are two kinds of people in this world. Those that seek out the strange and unusual. Those that are drawn to the unknown. Those that seek answers where there are none yet. And everyone else. If you're here, you're probably in the first group. Enjoy. I was a graphic designer at an agency shortly after I left college. Every day was incredibly stressful. They never knew how to say no to the client, and always overpromised and underdelivered. Every project was an emergency. Finally, my then girlfriend, now wife, suggested that I try meditation. I am in no way a religious guy, but I can admit strange and unexplained things happen outside of the realm of what we understand as normal. So I did some minor research and started off with Kundalini meditation and borrowed an album from a coworker to guide me through it. The first time I did it, I was just a little dizzy. There are a lot of breathing methods implemented in most meditations, but Kundalini asks you to do several different types. The next time it was around 3 a.m. This was also to help me sleep. My girlfriend was asleep and I was sitting on the floor in the bedroom by my bed. I could hear my breathing and my girlfriend's breathing, and distinctly, the breathing of someone else. My eyes snapped open and I turned around expecting Tina to be standing there. Nothing. I turned back around and was facing the door that leads out into a short hallway. That was where I first saw it. It was humanesque, but standing awkwardly. Like this is not how it normally stands. It looked like it was struggling to stand 2 feet. I couldn't make out details. It was entirely black, not to be confused with the absence of light, but black as a color. And it was standing in a dark hallway. We have a wireless switch for our fan and light, so I hit the light. Nothing was there. The next day I tossed it off to being late and a weird breathing exercise. It was just my brain playing games and my overactive imagination. I went to work and came home. Tina called and said that she was running late and that she would be home in a few hours. I said I'd have dinner ready. The water was boiling with the pasta and meat sauce was on low simmer. It had gotten dark. I had been playing a game when the dinner timer went off and suddenly realized just how dark it had gotten. I went into the kitchen to strain the pasta. This part happens in the blink of an eye. I had that feeling that someone was there, like having your eyes closed and someone holding their hand in front of your face. I freaked out and thought it was an intruder and turned quickly with a knife from the counter. With all of the survival skills I have, I still dropped the knife when I saw it. It was only there until it was in my direct field of vision. It was again, in perfect lighting, still a completely black spot, not really reflecting any light. Still no details inside the silhouette. I stood for what felt like forever staring in the space it had been, possibly still was, and darting my eyes around to the other dark places to make sure I was alone. I didn't want to tell Tina about it. A few years before, she had had night terrors and would wake up screaming this horrifying scream. Weeks passed and my hesitation to walk into a dark room passed with them. Eventually, I decided to leave my job, and because of the backwards work ethics, they were not going to pay for the 2 weeks of off time I had not used. I took the 2 weeks as vacation and decided to give my 2 weeks notice when I got back. It was going to be a staycation. Sleep as long as I can, play games the rest of the day. I would cook dinner and be all around relaxed when Tina got home. About a week in, I woke up briefly as Tina was getting ready for work and fell back asleep. What I thought was minutes later, something felt off and I opened my eyes. Out of the darkness of the hallway came a figure, like a rigid corpse being thrown at me, flying over me and landing on me. I sat up with a short scream. There were 3 deep impressions in the carpet in the hallway. Seeing them made and thinking of them still makes my skin crawl. They were larger than my feet, and definitely larger than Tina's. Totally could have been anything besides feet. The shape of them is the only thing I could relate to feet. I was 28 years old at the time of this writing, and I've been working as a freelancer from home since I left that job in 2009. I have seen what I like to call the stranger thing about 10 times. The sightings have not always been at night or inside the house. I've not seen them since earlier in 2010, but I've also not practiced any meditation since those first few times. Outside Huntsville, Texas, there's a road they call Demon Road that runs parallel to another road. In between is an old cemetery and a dirt road connecting the 2 roads. Rumor has it that on Demon Road a few years ago, there was a car accident and a police shootout that left 2 people dead. The car was never taken from the spot it crashed, and the angry spirits never left. About 4 years ago, I went down there with some friends to investigate it. We parked on the dirt road, and a truck pulled in from the other side. KC daylighters on, blinding me. A woman got out. I thought I was going to die. Technically, we were trespassing. She walked to my window and said, "You be careful." She got back in her truck and drove off. I got out, rubbed some dirt on my car in an attempt to reveal fingerprints, and headed down Demon Road. About a quarter mile down the road, I felt a cold punch on my chest and froze in my tracks. I tried to walk forward, and again felt a press on my chest. I turned back to my car with a friend while everyone else continued to the car. I decided something was telling me it was a bad idea to continue. About 30 minutes later, the group came back, and we started comparing pictures, audio, EMF readings. We caught some quality pictures and EMF readings, but no audio. One of the girls asked the guy next to her, "Why'd you pull my hair?" He said he didn't, and about 10 seconds later she screamed, "Something jerked my ponytail." We scrambled back to our cars and sped back to the city. When we got back to civilization, I got out and saw handprints and finger drawings all over my car. The most compelling were the 2 smeared handprints on my trunk. Like something was hanging on, lost grip, and slid down the trunk. The Roman numeral 12 was also fingered into the dust. I don't try to make sense of what happened that night, but that will always be burned into my brain as the absolute scariest encounter of my life. I worked housekeeping in a chain hotel. There was one room at the end of the hall where things would happen while you were working on it, and the same 2 things every time. Sometimes the faucet would start running, not full blast, but turned on enough to be running steadily. A half turn of the knob, I'd say. I'd be in the other room and suddenly hear water gurgling down the drain. Sometimes I'd be working on the tub and hear it behind me. Whoever or whatever would also turn on the TV. I'll never forget being warned on my first day that things would happen in the room. And then, while making a bed and rustling the sheets, noisily, suddenly aware I was hearing muffled noises and seeing the TV was on. I'm getting chills thinking back on those moments. Whatever part of the room your back was to, it felt like someone was there. I got the feeling they didn't want you to be in the way, but they wanted to be there with you. One thing we all felt throughout the staff, none of us felt threatened. None of us felt like it was a bad person or someone who was trying to frighten us. We all felt overwhelmingly like it was someone trying to reach out and had limited ways, was lonely. Sometimes I'd say hello. Sometimes I'd say sorry, because I felt like if they were frustrated trying to tell me something, I'd want them to know I felt for them. I realize this sounds crazy, but it happened all the time, and it was witnessed by several people. I thought about whoever it could be a lot. The hotel has since been bought by a college and was turned into dorms. I hope having people stay in the room more steadily will be a good thing for whoever the spirit was. Maybe they felt less lonely with students actually living there than a revolving door of hotel guests. Not me, but a friend who was a pilot. She stayed at an older hotel downtown Chicago and was studying for her recurrent class, which was in a few weeks. While at the desk, deep in thought, she heard people talking and laughing. When she looked up, it got quiet. She said it sounded like it was in the room with her and went back to studying. The noise started off softly and then again sounded like a party was going on in her room. She got up and looked around. Silence. There were no sounds coming from any rooms. No televisions on, no radios, no people in the hallway. The noise was definitely in her room. That night around 2 a.m., she was in bed and felt someone brush strands of hair from her forehead and tuck it behind her ear. She jumped up and turned on the light, and there was no one there. She didn't get back to sleep and bid around that overnight so she wouldn't be in that hotel ever again. A friend's grandfather either worked in or owned a hotel at some point. The building was hundreds of years old, dated back to the English Civil War. The story goes that he was cleaning up in the dining room and he saw 3 men in armor charging at him with weapons. Being ghosts, they just ran right through him. But apparently, he was left feeling physically ill afterward, having come in contact with the apparition. Friend's grandfather called a medium to come and check the place out. She freaked at the nature of the supposed presence in the hotel. If I remember correctly, they found through later research that there had been some murder committed by 3 soldiers in the building during the Civil War. Now, I was a server at a restaurant that used to be a hotel. It was said to be haunted by all kinds of things. My second day of training, and before I learned about the rumors, I saw a little girl who was about 3 or 4 years old pop her head out of a cupboard below the bar and look around. I turned my head toward her and tell her to get out of there. But here comes the cliche, she was gone. Once I walked into the kitchen and 2 of my friends were standing in front of a pile of shattered glass. Jaws dropped and faces pale. Dropping a glass in a restaurant happens daily. No one reacts like that. I asked what was wrong and they sort of babbled together that the glass threw itself off the counter and they watched it happen. I didn't see it, so I don't know personally, but I trust those 2, so I believe them. When my friend was staying in the Silver Queen Hotel in Virginia City, there were a lot of stories about this ghost harlot who couldn't find true love in her life, so she kept searching after death. I was sharing a room with my older brother, who was always the first to sleep and last to wake up, so I know he wasn't able to be tricking me. Nobody else had a room key, so I know it wasn't any of my other siblings doing anything. The room we were staying in had 1 bed, so he slept on a travel cot. He didn't have a blanket since the bed had only 1, but it was warm, so he didn't mind. He woke up not too long after I did one morning and started freaking out. His jacket was over him like a blanket, and he was fully tucked in. It looked like whoever did it with care. To this day, we joke around about his ghost girlfriend. I stayed at the Lizzie Borden Bed and Breakfast in April of 2016. After our grand tour of the place, all of the guests were encouraged to explore the house and take pictures and whatnot. Well, my friend and I decided to hang out in the parlor, also where Lizzie Borden's father was axed to death, and ask our tour guide more questions. As we were hanging out on the floor in a circle, the door to the dining room starts violently shaking. One of the other guests whispers, "I wonder if Mr. Borden is mad that we're lounging around in his death site." And the door immediately stopped shaking. Now, I don't really know if I believe in ghosts, but I do know that I definitely took a Xanax that night to knock me right out. I worked at the Wallowa Lake Lodge in the early 90s. I was a front desk clerk for graveyard shifts, so work consisted of me just doing lots of laundry. I can now fold a fitted sheet perfectly, first time. I was told if you hear a customer walking around, make sure they have what they need: tea, snacks, a fire. I'd hear footsteps from the basement stomping around upstairs in the front room. Go upstairs and no one was there. This happens dozens of times. Eventually, I just decided if I kept going upstairs every time I heard footsteps, I'd never get any work done. So I just ignore it. One night, I heard the front door ringer go off. Less common, but still common, and probably just the friends. Then footsteps. Same old, no big deal. Then the footsteps turned the corner. They approached the door to the basement. The creaky cellar door slowly opened. At this point, my butthole clenched. I approached the stairwell slowly, peered around the corner, and saw a face. I screamed. The guest who arrived late screamed. I screamed again. Then, as she's panting, I collected myself and said, "I'm so sorry. Are you checking in? Do you have a reservation?" Oops. Another time, while walking out of the kitchen, I saw a little girl in a powder blue dress at the edge of the dining room. I said, "Hi, sweetie, you need something?" She ran up the stairs to the rooms. I don't know why, but I took off after her. The guest doors were all loud. I get upstairs. No girl. No door closing noise. And every door was closed. I work in a haunted hotel. I have plenty of coworkers share stories of stuff they've seen, but I've personally only had one incident. I was working late just past midnight when I had to go to the bathroom. This bathroom I'm using is in a public area and is fairly large. Standard men's bathroom in that it has both stand-up and sit-down stalls. So I go in. I'm the only person present. It's quiet. And I walk to the stand-up stalls and start to go. As I'm going, I hear a knocking sound, very fast-paced, like someone rapping with their knuckles, and it's coming from behind me and over my shoulder. I look and I see the door for the handicapped sit-down stall is vibrating, which is what is making the knocking sound. It's moving like if someone had locked it from the inside and was bouncing off the lock and the outer doorstop. I'm still going to the bathroom, mind you, and I get overcome with chills. I finish up, and it's still making the noise. I think that it could possibly be a coworker playing a prank, so I laugh and say, "Very funny," and it immediately stops. So I walk over, expecting the door to be locked with a coworker inside. So I knock, and the door swings wide open with no one inside. I get overcome with chills again and just ran out. There was no way the door could have made that noise without being locked. I still use that particular bathroom, but never late at night. Lately, our ghost has been pretty quiet and our living customers have been so turned up that even ghost guest doesn't want to mess with them. But that doesn't mean she doesn't still have her fun here and there. We have these ladies that work for some kind of schooling public works program, and they do a lot of training in our area. So some of them stay with us every other month, and most of them have their favorite rooms. Some rooms they don't like. One of these ladies showed up as part of their group tonight, and she asked to be on the ghost's floor. So I start selecting a room, and she stops me and says, "But I don't want to stay in that back hallway. No way. Never again." So I say, "I'm sorry, was there something wrong with your room last time?" She says no, but she doesn't like me. You know who I mean. So I ask, "What room were you in again?" She gives me a room number that is not exactly the ghost room. It's the connector to the ghost room, though. Like if you wanted to rent that room and the ghost room, you could swing the door open between the two and have a suite. I definitely raised an eyebrow because I have this theory that the person responsible for our ghost guest, becoming a forever resident, entered the ghost room through those connecting doors. The woman then says, "I know it's not the room, but she was in there, and never again." So I say, "Actually, I do know what you're talking about. She's generally harmless, a little annoying, but harmless usually." So the woman says, "Last time, she jumped on my chest and tried to strangle me. I'll never stay back there again." The woman does not look like she's joking, so I gave her a room closer to the front, and her friend that she traveled with was supposed to have a room of her own, but after listening to all of this decides she wants to share the room that the other woman was staying in. So I cancel her reservation, and the two go off to their ghost-free room. Later, the woman comes back down and says, "You must think I'm crazy, but that girl, she cannot rest. She's angry. She's getting angrier. This is what I felt in that room. You must think I'm crazy." I say, "Actually, ma'am, I believe you. You're not the first woman in those rooms to ask to be moved or to complain about something feeling off about the room. I don't think you're crazy. I don't really like going up there either." So the woman then says, "Someone needs to find who killed that poor girl." And then makes a sign of the cross, takes a cookie, and goes back up to her room. When my son was about 6 months old, I had a dream I was at my grandparents' house with him. My grandfather was holding my son and crying while I talked to my grandmother. I told her I wished her and grandfather were still alive to see my son, and she said, "Don't worry, we see him." I didn't think anything else of it until about 5 years later. I was talking to my sister, and I mentioned I'd had a dream about our grandparents. She said, "Was Papa Joe holding your son while he rocked in his chair? And did Grandma tell you they were watching you?" I said yes and asked how she knew. And she said, "I had the same dream when my son was 6 months old." More recently, my son, 20 at the time, was driving home from work late one night. As he drove, he said he very clearly heard my mother, who had been dead for 2 years, say, "Jonathan, stop the car." Out of reflex, he did, and as soon as he stopped, 3 deer ran out in front of him. Had he not stopped the car, he would have hit them. When I was about 14, I was sleeping over at a friend's house in the finished basement. I was lying on the couch, not asleep yet, when I heard footsteps in the room with me. There was enough light to see that there was no one there, and I knew it wasn't his parents because I would have heard them come down those creaky stairs. Freaked out a bit, but not as much as when I told my friend about it the next day, and he informed me that the previous owners of the house had died by murder-suicide in the basement. My great-grandmother watched my great-grandfather die. They were truly in love forever. After he died, she woke up every morning and said, "Damn it," because she was ready to pass away. My great-aunts would hear her talking on a baby monitor they set up, talking to members of the family who had already passed. Finally, one afternoon, they heard her go, "John, finally! Why are you always late?" They were frozen, as John was my great-grandfather's name. They walked in 10 minutes later, and she had passed away. She was just waiting for her husband to come and get her. I spent 6 months living in my family's cottage in the far north of Michigan. That place always felt weird, but I chalked it up to my nerves and the odd noises of the woods, as I was born and raised in cities and had never been so isolated before. The night before, I moved out into an apartment with a friend, and as I was falling asleep, I experienced a powerful jerk. That thing where you feel like you're falling and sit up really hard. And as I did so, I heard a tiny voice in my ear say, "Goodbye." My parents have both passed away. Their wishes were to be cremated, the ashes put in a nice box, and to be set on our wine rack. The wine rack has 3 shelves, and I was instructed to keep one shelf between the boxes. My dad passed in 2011, and my mother passed in 2015. It took me a few weeks to find a box for my mom. In that time, I kept her ashes in the same room, but a few feet away from the wine rack. Apparently, someone wasn't happy about this. Outside, we had a doorbell, and every single night at 3 o'clock in the morning, it would begin ringing and wake me up. I took the button portion inside so nobody could push it. Still would ring at 3 a.m. Took the batteries out. Still rang. Broke the thing apart. Still rang. Our phone began to call itself and displayed my mother's name on the caller ID, even though the bill was in my name. My dad's guitar hung on the wall next to his wine rack. The strings started breaking. One every few days. All of this stopped as soon as I got my mother a box and put her in the correct spot. None of it has happened since. I have zero intention of moving these boxes, and if I ever move to a new house, they will be transported together, with something acting as a divider between the two of them. As a kid, I grew up in a wildlife refuge in Long Island. Way back around the Revolution, the Hawkins family had established the area, town of Brookhaven, and owned a ton of property. The Bartow family was the other major landowner at the time. Between the two, they owned most of the county. There's a Bartow family graveyard across the street to the north of the preserve, and a Hawkins family graveyard a few miles further north. While exploring the preserve, we found an additional Bartow family graveyard. The most recent stone was from the mid-1800s, and it looked like no one had been there in decades. Fence knocked down, trees all over the place, no path, no markings, nothing. While looking around and reading the stones, we noticed something strange. It was silent. This is a wildlife refuge. There's animals everywhere. Birds are chirping, deers are running, squirrels scurrying. Not here. Dead silent. No wind, no traffic, no birds, no animals. Not even a mosquito. It was so quiet, you could hear the blood pumping through your head. It's also clear. There are no trees inside the fence. No plants. It's covered in leaves. It's clearly untouched, but there's nothing growing. Everything around it looks like it's dying too. Suddenly a loud crack, an earth-shaking thump as a tree on the outskirts fell within a few feet of us. That put the creepy level over the top and we made a run for it. Between the library, town records, refuge records, word of mouth, and the intranet, we can't find any mention of this graveyard anywhere. The others are all photographed with logs of every stone, but this one doesn't even have a footnote. This is one my grandma used to tell about one of her aunts. They lived in Laos during the Secret War. Her aunt started talking with one of the American soldiers, and he started learning basic Hmong. After some time, though, he stopped showing up. The basic consensus was that he was dead, but she kept waiting for him. When things got really bad and the bombs started dropping, they fled to the caves for shelter. One night as everyone was sleeping, she hears a familiar voice. It's the soldier. He's mumbling in a very broken Hmong. "I'm back for you." Over and over. Her eyes are still closed until she feels something reach out and grab her shoulder and slowly move down to her hand. When it reached her hand, she said it wasn't human at all, but like a large animal paw. She briefly opened her eyes to see a dark figure, clearly not human though, standing over her. Then she heard her aunt get up. Something was said, but she couldn't make out what it was. The figure then left and the aunt followed. This was still in the middle of the night, mind you. This aunt was never seen again. The story is that the dead soldier came back to take her with him. Or something else imitated him in order to take her. I used to work as a cook in a tea room that used to be a brothel back in the 1800s. We had the dining area and a little gift shop that sold different kinds of pottery, silverware, etc. I would often be the last to leave and lock up, and would hear random sounds like footsteps or something falling off the floor, quite regularly, but never was fazed by it. One night I was called in late to start prepping for the Sunday brunch, so probably around 10 or 11. I hear footsteps upstairs and hear lights coming on. I knew I was the only one there at the time, so I decide to investigate. Walk up the stairs, look around. Everything seems normal, so I turn out the light and start heading back downstairs when I see the lights come back on. I'm starting to get a bit freaked out, so I yell out, "Hello?" with no response. I walk back upstairs to turn the lights off, and as soon as I reach for the switch, I see this large vase just lift up and move to the right, then drop to the floor. I was freaked, called my boss, and she casually brushes it off, like, that's regular here. I was helping my younger brother move into an apartment with his buddies and had to bring my very two young daughters with me. My youngest at the time was about 3 and fearless. She went to the different rooms with my brother, exploring and having a jolly old time, until she got to the kitchen. Upon entering, my daughter froze. Her eyes were huge and fearful, and within 10 seconds she was screaming bloody murder and running for me as fast as she could, mumbling about the lady in the kitchen. My brother and I tried laughing it off, redirecting her and taking her mind off it. But my normally calm child was hysterical, and we had to leave. She told me in bed that night that the lady had red eyes and was scary. If you knew my child, you'd understand how unlike her all of this was. She was 100% convinced that she saw a lady just standing in the kitchen, And still to this day, 7 years later, she swears it. I don't believe in ghosts or what have you, but her reaction made us question everything. A girl I knew for a few years and was very good friends with passed away in a car accident. A few days later, I have a dream that she's standing in the center of the road and I'm barreling toward her. I run into her, but then she reappears in the seat beside me. She forces my head toward her abdomen, where her stomach would be, but there's a large mouth. The teeth are made of broken glass and sharp metal. She keeps saying, "Shh, shh." I wake up from the dream, and I'm still hearing, "Shh." I look at the foot of my bed, and she's standing in my room. She walks through my door and into the hallway. I follow her. She walks down the hallway and vanishes through the front door of the house. I didn't realize at the time, but my dad was on the couch. He asked me if I was okay and asked if the flickering lights are what woke me up. He didn't see her, and I never noticed the lights flickering. I went on a Tinder date a couple of years ago. Everything started out relatively normal. We met at a nice downtown restaurant for dinner. She was even prettier in person and the conversation was flowing. However, it didn't take long for me to realize she was a super private person. For example, she wouldn't tell me her last name, where she worked, or say anything about her family. She made it abundantly clear that she was protecting herself, and honestly, I don't blame her. I shrugged it off, and the date continued. She took great interest in the fact that I was in seminary studying to be a pastor. That was nice because usually that's a deal breaker for most women, at least in my experience. Toward the end of our meal, she confessed something to me. "I have something to tell you," she says, "but please don't think I'm crazy." I braced myself for whatever she was about to say. She explains that she recently moved into a new apartment. She lived alone, which was also a new thing. Though she couldn't put her finger on it, she was convinced there was a presence of a sinister and paranormal nature in her apartment. She had hardly slept since she moved in because she was plagued with constant nightmares and strange occurrences. I could see the fear and exhaustion in her eyes. She seemed quite sincere. "I can tell you're a good guy," she said. She elaborated that I seemed trustworthy and had a calming presence. "I know how this sounds, but would you please come home with me tonight? Honestly, I'm just scared to go back there alone. I'm not looking for sex." I was really taken aback by this. It's not every day I get asked to spend the night with a beautiful woman whom I just met. I figured she was either telling the truth or she picked a really odd way to initiate sex. Either way, the night would be interesting. We talked for a bit longer and I agreed to spend the night with her. I followed her home, and when I walked into her apartment, I was immediately struck with bad vibes. There was just something ominous about that place. I didn't want her to freak out, so I kept these feelings to myself, said a quick prayer, and followed her to the bedroom. She wasn't kidding about the sex. I tried, but was met with rejection. We kissed and cuddled, but nothing too crazy, and then fell asleep. I just laid there for a while in the silent darkness, lost in thought. Sometime later, I 100% heard someone walking down the hallway outside the bedroom. The door was closed, however, so I couldn't see anything. I was definitely frightened, but my curiosity got the better of me, so I went to investigate. Slowly, I opened the door. I looked to my left, then to my right. Nothing. I walked downstairs to check out the rest of the apartment. Nothing. Went back upstairs to check the bathroom and guest bedroom. Nothing. When I walked out of the guest room, which was right across from my date's bedroom, I looked to my left and right again. At the end of the hallway, I saw a black humanoid body standing there, completely still. It was almost like a shadow, but I could discern that it was a three-dimensional figure. This figure was large in stature. There's no way it could have been my date. She was maybe 5'1" at best. I rushed back into my date's room. To my horror, she wasn't in bed where I left her. I called out her name, but there was no response. I had just walked through the entire apartment, so it literally made no sense to me that she wasn't there. The bed was low to the ground, so she couldn't be under it. The closet was opened. It was packed with boxes, so I knew she wasn't in there either. The window was shut tight, plus it was the second story. It was as if she had vanished. I grabbed my wallet, keys, and cell phone and ran out of the apartment in nothing but my underwear. The shadowy figure was gone. I jumped into my car and sped away. I never heard from her again. Her Tinder profile was deleted the next day, and she never responded to any of my texts. Still to this day, I have no idea what happened that night. I checked the news and stuff like that. Never found anything. Easily one of the most terrifying, unexplainable things I have ever experienced. I grew up in Northern Virginia, and we had plenty of battlefields and such to visit for school field trips. In 5th grade, my class went to Belle Grove Plantation, which was at Cedar Creek Battlefield. Cool house. Still has damage to her columns from gunfire from the battle. My class was in the kitchen of the plantation, listening to the tour guide talk about whatever it is you tell a bunch of 10-year-olds about a plantation. There are these big double doors on each side of the room, and they're wide open. And then we hear humming coming from outside. The teacher's aide, who I'll call Bulldog, 'cause she looked like one, told us that whoever was humming to knock it off. But that's the thing. It wasn't any of us, and it was coming from outside. Bulldog goes out one side of the kitchen, comes back in, goes out the side that leads to the garden. She comes back in, says to the tour guide lady, no one at all is out there, but she could hear the humming right there in the garden. Doesn't sound like much, right? Fast forward a few years. I'm reading the Ghosts of Virginia book, and there's a story about Belle Grove Plantation in it. Apparently, the lady of the house was found in the smokehouse one day, badly beaten, half in the embers, with clear fist imprints on her face. She dies just a few days later. A slave girl was accused of the beating and murder and was hung for it. The lady of the house liked to walk the garden and was always humming. Various people were witness to the humming that would take place in the garden. I was thoroughly freaked out when I realized I got to witness it too. There's a place called Meadowbrook Manor in Rochester Hills, Michigan, my hometown. It's on the campus of Oakland University. It was owned by the Dodge family, and quite a few people have died there, including the young. My buddy worked there for years, and my wife hosts events there. I even proposed to her on the property. The house is both beautiful with stuff like secret staircases through the bookshelves, but it's also very creepy. There are a few known ghosts, including Caramel Apple Girl, The story is she is a young, quiet ghost that lives in the house and holds a caramel apple with peanuts. Numerous people have claimed to see her, including my best friend, who was a non-BS guy who would never tell anyone. He was cleaning up at the end of an event when he saw a girl on the staircase eating a caramel apple. He asks her, "Are you okay?" And she said she was lost. My buddy said, "Hold on. We'll find your parents, so come on down." He turned to grab a phone for a moment, turned around, and she wasn't there. He checked the stairs, and there were peanuts there. He and a few others roamed the house looking for the girl. He called me and I drove over real quick because I thought this was awesome. After another 30 minutes of searching, we finally called the police and the employees locked the place up. When we were on the side of the house chatting with the university's police officers, a light turned on in one of the bedrooms, and we immediately freaked out because that house had been searched for hours. My buddy looked at the two cops, and they look at us, and we're all figuring out who was going to do what. The cop starts walking over, stops, looks at us and says, "Screw that," because he had heard the stories. He called in a bunch of backup before searching, and apparently there were no peanuts on the stairs when they went in. You know, every time I read news stories, I think, well, this is it. I've peaked at finding disturbing stories. And I'm proven wrong over and over again. If you enjoyed this video, please hit that like button. And if you're new here, please consider subscribing and turn on those notifications so you don't miss out on any new stories. Thank you for watching. See you next time.